can be argued that the main driving factor in the success of game sequels in the recent years has been the level of innovation that the game contains. Failure to innovate usually results in a failure of the game. A good example of these would be the Arkham games, which do an outstanding job at innovation with each game, and the Assassin's Creed games, which have failed horribly due to the lack of innovation and the feel that the games are just being copied and pasted. Although this isn't the only or even the main reason for failure, it's safe to say that it plays a large part in the failure of the games. Let's analyze first the success of the Arkham games and how Rocksteady uses innovation to make successful sequels. The Batman Arkham games by Rocksteady have been immensely successful, from the initial release of the Arkham Asylum selling 9.5 million copies, Arkham City selling a whopping 12 million plus copies, and Arkham Knight selling 7 million copies. From well-written stories, excellent depiction of the existing comic book characters, a masterpiece of a soundtrack, and groundbreaking graphics, these games have rapidly garnered popularity among the gaming community. The movies were thriving, the games were thriving, and the animated TV shows and movies of Batman were also thriving. But somewhere deep in the dusty recess of the Batman media vault lies a game forgotten in time, banished to the graveyard of failed games by the fans. Prior to the Arkham games, superhero games weren't exactly known for their fluid combat systems. It was usually clunky, it didn't fit the character you were playing, and it was just a generic combat system reskinned for a superhero game. But with the Arkham games, it all changed. You actually felt like Batman. Rocksteady innovated a brand new combat system named the Free Flow Combat System, developed especially for the character of Batman. Batman moved in a way that you would expect him to move, combining offensive moves with defensive moves, moving to strike with speed and a flurry of punches. One button input would equal one punch or kick from Batman, and this extreme responsiveness was part of the reason it felt so good to play. There was rarely a time in game where you would say, I didn't want Batman to do that. Variations in enemy types kept the player engaged, with different approaches required for different enemies. Shield enemies would require you to jump on them and destroy their shield. Armed enemies could be dealt with by obscuring their vision or taken out stealthily. Knife enemies would require you to dodge all of their attacks, waiting for a window in which you could strike, and so on. The counter system allowed for a defensive addition to the combat system, yet again throwing another aspect in the combat system that the player would have to consider when fighting a group of enemies. Not to mention that while you are in a flurry of combos and you counter an enemy or even multiple enemies with a no-look grab of the arm and snap it, it looks extremely badass. It feels like Batman, crippling poor Gotham criminals under the burden of the American healthcare system. And this, on top of all of this, you can choose to add in your gadgets for even more variation. The combat system is, in my opinion, the best to ever exist, and it's laid the foundations for other games like Spider-Man. It's responsive, it feels great, it looks cool, it keeps the player engaged, and it's fresh. It's new and there's been nothing like it before. Then there's also the stealth in the games, which is also done exceptionally well. The combination of the grappling hook, gliding and sneaking around, choking every thug into unconsciousness, feels very satisfying. The AI isn't stupid and will investigate the things you do, the noises you make, and a nice touch in the games is a heart rate monitor. It has zero impact to the game mechanically, but physically being able to see the fear in your enemies rising as they start to scream at you, to show yourself and even go back to back, looking around more often, is an amazing touch of detail to the game. Detective mode entwines effortlessly and beautifully with the stealth aspect of the game. Seeing enemies through walls while being perched above, using your gadgets to set up an approach to how you will clear a set of enemies never leaves you feeling bored or uninterested when in these situations. Enemies in these sections usually are always armed, so a stealth approach is usually the recommended way. Enemy variation in the later games, such as medics who will revive enemies you have downed and have been found by their friends, and enemies that wear armor that doesn't allow you to see them in detective mode, sets aside the differences in the previous games and keeps these stealth sections feeling new and fresh. These new additions and innovations are what sets the Rocksteady games aside from the Arkham Origins game. But the move from City to Origins felt a lot like a move from an Assassin's Creed game to another Assassin's Creed game. Same gameplay mechanics, same map design. Ubisoft was so lazy that the soundtrack called Ezio's Family for that game specifically was reused so much that till this day the franchise uses a slightly altered version of the same soundtrack. Yes, the soundtrack is good and reception was overwhelmingly positive, but how about you make another soundtrack of the same quality, Ubisoft? It's been 14 years. There are significant changes in the Assassin's Creed games, but these come after 2 or 3 games that run on the exact same engine. The story is usually similar to older games or just too boring to be interested in. An example in close relation to the Batman games would be Gotham Knights. This game attempted to completely move away from everything to do with the Arkham games, despite being a direct continuation of those games story-wise. But since the Arkham games had gotten so complex with so many things being added on top of each game, Gotham Knights had to take the drastic step to innovate. However, everything that the Arkham games got right, Gotham Knights failed. The Arkham combat system feels fast, Batman moves quickly. In Gotham Knights, combat feels slow and clunky. Button inputs feel fast, snappy and responsive in the Arkham games, while button inputs feel delayed in Gotham Knights. The stealth is equally as bad. Whereas in the Arkham games, Batman can use grates, breakable walls, generators, fire extinguishers and so much more, Gotham Knights limits you to the perch, hone in and silent takedown style of stealth, a mere shell of what you had in the Arkham games. It doesn't feel like an addition, it actually feels like things have been taken away from the player, and either you get something worse or nothing as compensation. Traversal is equally as bad, and it feels like your character is made of paper and has no weight to it, unlike the Arkham games. The driving feels slow and boring, unlike the Batmobile, which feels fast and fun. Just look at the way that the two vehicles are called in. Even that's enough reason to understand why the Batcycle sucks. Although they innovated the entire series, everything was worse than its predecessor. It even looked worse, and ran at a lower frame rate. Other issues, such as a boring story and level design, make this really feel like a step down from the Arkham games. So innovation isn't easy, despite what Rocksteady makes it seem like with the 3 Arkham games. So is Arkham Origins a bad game? I personally don't think so. It's a good game, but it's only good because Arkham City was good, and it feels like a DLC for that game. The 3 things that Arkham Asylum, Arkham City and Arkham Knight all have in common is the innovation in each game's succession. Arkham Origins failed to build upon Arkham City in any significant way. The map is similar, the combat is almost the same, the gadgets are almost the same, and the story isn't interesting enough to be able to compensate for the lack of all of these things. That's not to say that the story is bad, but it just doesn't offer as much as the jumps from the Rocksteady games do when it comes to adding new things in the game. There's not enough reason for the player to play the game. Arkham Asylum was the first game and it innovated many things. The combat system, stealth mode and detective mode and other general things such as gadgets and the gliding. Arkham City expanded on this exponentially with the map 5 times larger than Asylum. The combat system was refined and the detective mode was also cleaned up. New gadgets such as smoke bombs, freeze charges weren't only useful in puzzles, but they also opened more variations in combat. The change from Arkham City to Arkham Knight was even larger. Now instead of Arkham City Prison, you can explore the entirety of Gotham. New combat mechanics like the fair multi-takedown and improved free-flow combat mechanics made you feel so much more like Batman. And the biggest addition to the game, the Batmobile, and wow did you really feel like the Batman with this. The sound, the look, the speed, the tank mode, it was beautiful. It was phenomenal how well Rocksteady had managed to make the Batmobile. Arkham Origins isn't all bad however. The Deathstroke fight in this game was done beautifully, and it's exactly what you would expect from a Deathstroke vs Batman fight. The tactical powerhouse that is Deathstroke, a master of hand-to-hand combat, would be expected to use his lethal agility, strength and strategic thinking when fighting Batman, who in return would utilize his boundless adaptability to precisely dismantle Deathstroke's attacks. Arkham Knight completely fails this, and in this game, you fight Deathstroke while you're restricted to the Batmobile, and can only give Deathstroke multiple sneaky backshots until you finally catch him and lock him up. And that's it. I understand utilizing the Batmobile to its fullest potential since it's a new addition to the game, and the developers want you to use it, but we could have at least had a short hand-to-hand fight with Deathstroke, a super cool villain thrown to the side with a boring mission and battle. So well done to Arkham Origins for creating the best Batman fight sequence to ever exist. In comparison to the innovation that the Rocksteady games offer, Arkham Origins falls flat. But if you enjoy playing the Arkham games, you will love Origins too. It does a lot of things well, and the story, the voice acting and the soundtrack are all things that are brand new compared to the Rocksteady games, and the magnitude of failure and backlash that this game received was largely undeserved in my opinion. Its sales are most likely representative of the reputation that the fans had from Arkham City. Logically, Arkham Knight, being after Origins, should have failed, but it didn't since it was a genuinely good game with new things for the players to enjoy. Also, as a final side point, it easily has one of the best collector's edition statues to ever exist. Innovation has always been a vital factor in games and their success, and is more important now than ever since the gaming industry has grown exponentially in the recent years, and with more games and more competitors, players are looking for new things that would incentivize them to play a game. If there's a game that is essentially the same as its predecessor, which you've already played, or if there is another sequel with new mechanics and new things for you to enjoy, you will obviously be more incentivized to pick the latter. All good sequels capitalize on this. God of War and God of War Ragnarok, Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2, Spider-Man PS4 and Spider-Man 2, the Horizon games, Tomb Raider games, and so on. Now with Mirage being recently released, and a focus more to the roots of the game, it's difficult to say if this complicated, convoluted method of innovation will actually work. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe. It helps more than you think. Maybe even leave a like. Either way, I appreciate you taking the time to get all the way to the end of this video.